as and when. The session that we're going to be running here is about expatriates, and I think it's about an aspect of expatriation that is not often talked about, and it's about what I'm calling the ability to be in two places at the same time magically, and how to do it. And this is based on some qualitative research by a colleague of mine where we worked on a diploma for intercultural management many years ago, a guy called Keith Goodall and his colleague John Roberts. So this is a little bit of research which really struck me a number of years ago, and I thought, wow, that's really important because it's often forgotten by expats. And many of you may be in a situation where you're coaching expats. Now, the name of the session is called The X Factor. I think a lot of stuff on expats is all very useful. We prepare them for departure, we prepare them for culture shock, we prepare them for re-entry, we help them to integrate at a local level. But I don't want to deal with any of those issues which are pretty well documented. I want to focus on something which I think is ignored really in the literature, and often ignored by both expatriates and people who support them. So the kind of expatriate challenges that I think many of us have to deal with are things like, certainly I remember when I first arrived in Italy and had my first 3 months there as a Brit, and I managed to go to the delicatessen shop and buy some salami without going to the supermarket, and then coming back for a holiday in the UK to meet my parents and family, and coming back and telling them the wonderful stories of how I had managed to buy something in Italian without going through the supermarket, and then basically sitting in the chair like those people and saying, that's nice, dear. The tendency for the expat hero to come back and not really be perceived as a hero. The other issues I think expats often face are issues about what to do at the end of their assignment. They go off, they disappear off the horizon, and then one of the challenges is thinking about, is their seat going to be warm when they come back? Has there been some kind of career plan for them? Will they be able to rejoin the organization? And as many of you know, expats have a tendency to have a high attrition rate, and companies find it difficult to retain them when they come back for a variety of reasons. The third kind of challenge, and mainly the challenge we're going to be focusing on in this webinar here, is that difficulty that expats have between maintaining a foot still in the headquarters of the organization, while at the same time being integrating in their local subsidiary and in their local community. So how are they going to keep one foot in both camps? It's a kind of triangle, I think, really, between the expat, the local staff, and head office. And I think one of the roles of an expat is definitely that of being a kind of liaison, if you like, an interpreter, a mediator between what's happening at the local level and what's happening in head office, and to be able to translate local needs to the head office, and head office strategy to local staff, or strategy or the company values, for example, and to transport those, to translate those so that they make sense at a local level. We worked for a couple of years with a large pasta manufacturing company whose name will be anonymous, based in Parma in Italy, and one of the challenges they certainly had was the challenge of maintaining their kind of umbilical connection with Parma, the head office, while being considered often out in space by the rest of the organization. So the challenge there is, how to maintain that kind of connection with the head office while being focused on doing their job and achieving their mission in the local office. So this was a little piece of research that we did. Bill came from Small Oil. Small Oil had been acquired by a large company, let's call it Euroil. So he was part of an acquisition process, and Bill had great competencies that the organization needed, because Bill had a lot of experience in China, and at that time Euroil had very little experience in China and needed somebody to go to China in order to to be the country manager within that particular office. So what happened was Bill was sent to China. He didn't spend any time in head office. He almost joined the company, and 3 weeks later he was sent off to China, where, although he had a huge experience, maybe 7 or 8 years experience of living and working in China, the problem was that the Chinese locals, who he was the country manager of, what happened is that the knowledge that existed within China was locked in China and was unable to get back to the headquarters. So the two parts of the organization, China and the head office, became more and more disconnected over time. Let's look at some of the reasons for that. Well, the first thing is Bill, brand new in this merged organization, being very proud of the fact that he had the China experience and being very proud of the fact that he was being sent to China in an area where he was extremely competent. Basically, he received visits from people from head office, and these visits from people from head office he found very difficult to manage. He found them difficult to manage because he didn't really understand what they wanted of him. He didn't really understand what their questions were. He didn't understand their language. All of these people were senior visitors from head office and from other regions who passed through where he was in Shanghai, and he found it extremely difficult to deal with them. He was also receiving emails from head office on strategic matters about which he knew very, very little. And as a result of that, he became more and more confused and frustrated by his lack of understanding of exactly what was required of him in China. The other issue is that, if I can click up the next one here, yeah, these visits from the guys from headquarters. So he received these guys from headquarters who had no idea about China, who he thought basically were idiots, had no understanding of the Chinese culture, had no understanding of the Chinese market, were coming on a little bit of what he considered to be kind of organizational tourism, and he frankly found them irritating. He had meetings with regional managers in the area, China being part of the Asia-Pacific area, and unfortunately Bill was talking small oil talk, and the others didn't really understand what he was talking about. And this is one of the key factors which made it very difficult for Bill, his language. Although, of course, he spoke English, he didn't speak the language that you need to speak in an organization so that people know that you're a club member. So, you know, he was doing his best to understand what these regions were talking about. He kind of tried to get himself a Euro-oil, small oil dictionary in order to interpret not only the acronyms, but also, you know, what they meant by key words. You know, they were using language which was a little bit alien to him, and his language seemed alien to them as well. And the problem was he had to go back to London on a regular basis and to report back to top management about how China was going. Unfortunately, Bill arrived there and basically wanted to present, you know, the complexities of China. Unfortunately, the top management found his presentations confusing, contradictory, and certainly not framed in the language that they were expecting. So the issue with Bill is that because Bill had joined the organization and then had been catapulted over to China so quickly, nobody in the headquarters at a senior level knew really who he was. He had no track record with anybody. He had no contacts there. He had no sponsors, certainly. And so, you know, people were saying, Bill? You know, who's Bill? Oh, yeah, he's that guy in China. Oh, right, okay, didn't know that. So he had nobody really there in the headquarters who could sponsor him, support him, or believed in him. So he felt a little bit like a person standing outside some kind of exclusive club where people are walking past him with this club membership card, but he didn't seem to have access. You know, and in the language of, you know, the intercultural world, it was such a high context environment that he felt excluded from this rather difficult language and way of behaving. So he felt a bit like an alien in his own new organization. Now, you know, the good thing is Bill was very sensitive to China. I mean, he was interested in Chinese history. He did Tai Chi and stuff like that. And at the beginning, he got on really brilliantly with all of his Chinese counterparts. But they liked him because he spoke Mandarin pretty well. So that was appreciated. He was sensitive to Chinese ways and Chinese cultures, so they enjoyed that. But after about 2 to 3 months, they began to dislike him. They began to disrespect him, and they began to find him a liability in the organization. So he was somebody culturally extremely competent, but the problem was Chinese believed at that time in the organization that the only use that an expat has is to be able to frame the requirements of the local office back in headquarters through their Guanxi network. And Bill had no network. Bill knew nobody in headquarters of any importance. And so when the Chinese were asking Bill to represent them within Ural headquarters, Bill, tentatively kind of knocking on the door of top management, was unable to make the requests of the Chinese, requests for resources, requests for clarification, requests for support for particular projects. Bill was unable to get the ear of anyone within the organization. One story kind of sums up the whole thing. The senior manager from the headquarters came to China to visit, and Bill had a very, very good relationship with some senior ministers also, Minister for Oil, for example. And when the senior manager, the EVP, the executive vice president from this company arrived and saw Bill in very close conversation in Mandarin, chatting very comfortably with the local Chinese minister, the reaction was, whose side is Bill on? Is Bill on the Chinese side? Is he going local? At that time, you know, relations with China were not always particularly easy. This is a few years ago now. And so, you know, whose side is this guy on? You know, is he on your oil side, or is he on the side of China and the Chinese minister? So there was quite a lot of suspicion about Bill. And unfortunately, as a result of Bill's inability to communicate the needs of the Chinese subsidiary back to top management in a language they understood, and to make the requests of the Chinese organization palatable and understandable to their top management, he was losing the interest and support not only of his own top management in headquarters, who didn't really know him anyway, but also of his Chinese locals, who were then contacting heads of HR within the organization to say that they thought that Bill should be removed from the organization. And after 7 months, Bill was fired from the organization. Ironically, speaking to the head of HR in Ural, they said that even if Bill had succeeded in China, had been very successful, I don't know, had found oil off of the Chinese coast or something like that and had managed to get a huge deal, if that had happened, he would have been sacked earlier, because nobody really trusted Bill enough with a successful project. At that time, the Chinese subsidiary was not considered to be a highly important one for the organization. So he was sent there really as a stopgap in order to fill the office and get things ticking over. So ironically, even if Bill had been successful, he would have failed even earlier in this particular mission. So that's a sad story of Bill. So just as a, your time to contribute now. Hi, Adrian. Nice to see you there. What do you think were the main factors in this story of Bill that contributed to his lack of success as an expat in China? And this is where I'm going to go offline and ask you to pop a few things in chat just for a minute there. So a few little bullet points that you think came out as the main factors which contributed to Bill's inability to succeed in the Chinese context. Absolutely. I mean, Vincent, it's this failure to secure the network at home and the desire to please as a new boy in the organization. So he thought this was a great opportunity to show what he could do, but without the network he couldn't do it. So no network at home, absolutely, and not able to create that bridge, to have that kind of bridging role as an expat. A lot of the value of the expat is in that ability to be able to span distance and to create a kind of virtual corridor, if you like, between headquarters and the local office. Yeah, he did not protest to go before he is anchored in the organization. Absolutely, Adrian. I mean, this is one of the key things. The head of HR said of Bill, said, actually, if you were a real Euroil person, you would have never accepted this assignment. You would have said, first of all, guys, I need 6 months in headquarters to fully understand strategy, to build, you wouldn't say build up my network, but to build confidence in my ability to transfer strategies and organizational values from headquarters to the Chinese context. And so he said any good Euroil manager at that level would have refused that assignment. But Bill, trying to please, accepted and signed basically his own career death warrant within the organization. So that was the problem with Bill. Now, I want to tell you in 5 or 6 minutes the story of Jim. Jim, very, very different to Bill. This is Jim. Jim is represented as a kind of Janus figure, and Janus being, or Janus, depending on your pronunciation, is the god with the head that goes kind of in two directions. The god of windows and opportunities, the ability to be in two places at the same time. And Jim was able to be in Colombia where he was sent and to remain in London at the same time. And I want to show you the story of Jim because I think it's a fascinating story into what makes expatriate success at a senior level, at a country manager level. So, Jim. The main thing about Jim is he was young. He was 27 years old when he joined the organization as a graduate, and after a few months he was considered a talent, a bright young talent, and he was spotted to join the CEO office. And as you know, in many organizations, the CEO office is a kind of breeding ground really for young talents. They have the opportunity to do a bit of research, to do some data crunching, to prepare some presentations for the CEO. But the most important thing is not, the rather boring work that they actually have to do, but the key of being in the CEO office is every day you see the CEO. And because you see the CEO, you see the network of the CEO, which is the senior management team. So like the little picture there, Jim got the opportunity to be a fly on the wall watching the CEO building, developing, creating strategy in real time. Huge insight he gained into how does top management think. One of the problems is that in many organizations at middle management level, they think top management are a bunch of idiots, and quite frankly, if they were, the senior manager or the CEO, they would do things completely different. It's not so easy when you're in that situation. You see the constraints they're under. You see who their clients are, who their stakeholders are, and you begin to also understand how you need to think when you're at the top of the organization. So Bill realized that in this particular organization, in order to succeed, you had to have two expatriate assignments. They need to be at least 2 years for each one. So you needed to spend 4 years out of the center of the organization. Now, spending 4 years out of the center of the organization, you can disappear. You can disappear off the radar. Every 3 months that you're away from the center as an expat and don't keep in touch, there is a kind of half-life of the memory of the organization towards you. So you start slowly, month by month, to disappear off the map, disappear off the radar, and disappear out of the memory of people in the organization. So Jim knew that this was going to happen. If you wanted to grow in this organization, you needed to spend 4 years abroad. So he decided very early on, he was 28 when he was invited to join the CEO office, he decided that CEOs are busy people. Top managers are busy people. They're not always available. They may be your sponsor. They may be leaving you. They may bet on you. But quite frankly, they don't have a lot of time for you because they're pretty busy. There are other people that you need to cultivate in your network in the organization. Things like executive assistants, like in the picture here. The CEO's PA was one of the key people in the organization for having, for one, giving you access to the CEO, and secondly, of having information that she could give you without disturbing the CEO. So basically, Jim spent a year in the organization building his network, not only of other senior managers who of course he met regularly through meetings with the CEO, but also key gatekeepers within the organization. Then he got the offer to go to his assignment in Colombia. Colombia was actually a good assignment at that particular time. There was lots happening there. There were oil deals to be made. Jim knew about this a number of months before, and he had kind of schoolboy Spanish, but he really intensively learned Spanish and went with a kind of intermediate level of Spanish to Colombia. So when he arrived, they were quite surprised. They'd never had an expat from London who actually had an intermediate level of Spanish. This was surprising to them and pleased them because it was a sign of commitment that he was interested in staying the full 2 years. Because often they were getting expats who were leaving after 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, for all the reasons that we know, partners not being happy, job not working out as expected, homesickness, stuff like that. So he made a great first impression, but his impression improved because Jim was fresh from his boardroom meetings with the CEO and the top management. So Jim, without breaking confidence with confidential information, he started to kind of think aloud with his local Colombian team, explaining the big picture, explaining your oil strategy to the local people. And they began to realize then that basically these guys in head office, they're not so stupid after all. They began to understand how the Colombian operation was linked to the strategy of the organization. The other thing that he did was managed to maintain his network of key relationships within headquarters. You need those relationships in headquarters because when you are absent from headquarters, people talk about you, and they talk about you in corridors, coffee rooms, lunches, and they talk behind your back. And when they talk behind your back, sometimes they say good things about you, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes your reputation is at risk, and sometimes you need people who trust you and you trust them, who are there to help you to repair your reputation while you're away, to defend you. Bill had nobody to defend him. Jim had people who maybe sort of said, who replied, hey, Jim's not doing too well in Colombia, or I hear he hasn't signed this contract yet and it's 3 months delayed. Then you would have one of your network sort of defend you by saying, I think you need to know the context that Jim's working under there. I think he's doing a great job. He's done this, that, and the other. Somebody to support you and repair your reputation. There's one story which highlights, I think, the kind of effort that it takes to be in two places at the same time. And it's a fascinating story of how Jim managed to be in both London and Colombia at the same time. There was a senior manager, let's call him Frank, who had to have a meeting with a deputy oil minister from Colombia in order to move towards an oil deal there. Frank, Jim knew from his time in the CEO office, was pretty tough talker, probably would have a personality clash if he didn't kind of calm things down with this oil minister. So Jim knew the oil minister, the deputy oil minister, he knew Frank, he thought there would be some issues. Jim sent him a report, but he didn't send the report to Frank. Jim sent a report about how to handle the oil minister to the assistant of Frank. And in giving the report to the assistant of Frank, Jim also, by telephone, gave the assistant some additional information which was not in the report, which the assistant could use in order to also look good, and that he got some extra information from John that came out of the assistant's mouth. Now, the assistant had to give Jim's report to Frank. The issue was it had to be given to him when Frank was attentive. Now, the problem was, in this period, Frank's daughter was getting married, and the assistant had been invited to the wedding. Now, how do you give a report to somebody who's the father of the bride so that they are attentive? So what Jim said is give him the report, but make sure he's done the speeches, he's kissed the bride, he's sitting in a corner, he's looking relaxed, he's got a smile on his face. Give him that report. It's a one-page report, but I need him to read that before he gets in the plane. So what happened is the report was given to him, and the extra thing that Jim did is he made sure the report had a font size which was big enough for Frank to read, because Frank was having eyesight problems, and anything too small he wouldn't read it. So the font size was big enough for him. And so basically it was like Jim being at the wedding, because the assistant was giving the report to Frank at the moment that was the best time to give it to him, so that he was attentive, and the report was written in such a way as to make it literally readable as possible for Frank. Attention to detail, attention to networks, attention to making people look good and make sure that everyone looked good here. Second thing he did, he managed to ensure that the local staff in Colombia went to the headquarters. The issue of sending local staff to headquarters is something that everybody does, but what you fail sometimes to do as a country manager is you send people off to the headquarters and they appear idiots. They appear country bumpkins because they don't have the language of the headquarters. They go with Colombian issues, with Colombian speak, and they don't speak the language of the senior people in the organization. So Jim organized their local staff, their key talents, to go on training courses in the headquarters. And Jim said, I don't care what training course they go on. It could be a course in Excel. I don't care. But the key thing is I want to know who's on the attendance list at that particular program, because I want them to build their own network in headquarters so that they can, after I leave, have that bridge with headquarters. So what Jim did, he shared profiles of the key people who were going to be at that training course. He gave them key questions to ask them to show that the Colombians were smart, on the ball, asking intelligent, educated questions that were relevant to the headquarters. And they went across there, built those relationships, appeared smart, on the ball, asking all the right questions. As a result of that, they were then refreshed with information, news, gossip, new language that was being talked of in the headquarters, and they were bringing that back to Colombia to Jim. So Jim was having his knowledge of headquarters refreshed by his local staff, and his local staff were pleased because they were looking good. Of course, Jim, like Bill, had to go back to headquarters, and he had to report on how things were going in Colombia. Now, Jim used to organize a meeting the day before with his network and local colleagues within headquarters. And what he used to say was, right, thanks guys, that was a great meeting, thanks for the briefing, super, I did not learn anything new from you today, I am so pleased. What Jim did not want to hear was new things on the agenda, new things happening that he hadn't heard of in Colombia. So he basically wanted to be sure that, just check, that there was nothing happening in headquarters that he didn't know about already. And he was pleased when there was no news. He went there, he talked in Euro speak rather than small oil speak, which was Bill's problem, and he managed to ensure that local knowledge was being transferred from Colombia across to the head office. He was able to frame, if you like, the debate in Colombia so that it was comprehensible, clear, understood, and acted upon by headquarters. And of course the Colombians loved this. So basically Jim was able to receive a lot more resources from headquarters. I mean, when Jim asked for things, they usually happened, because Jim never asked for anything that was not going to lead to some kind of return on investment. And the final story is a story about bodyguards. Bodyguards. Jim asked for 9 bodyguards to the executive assistant of the CEO. He knew that this was going to be a strange thing to ask for, but he said, by tomorrow I need to organize, 1, a large limousine, and out of that limousine have got to come 9 bodyguards. Of course, it's not a usual request in headquarters to ask for 9 bodyguards, but the secretary, the assistant to the CEO, asked him, and he said, well, it's a crazy thing to ask, but Bill's never asked us for something that hasn't been necessary in the past. His track record proves that his requests are reasonable. For God's sake, give him the bodyguards. Jim got the bodyguards. The reason for asking for the bodyguards is because he was having a meeting, a pre-negotiation meeting before the CEO arrived, in order to take the negotiation with the oil minister to a new stage. The only way, because don't forget, Jim here is 29 years old. He's incredibly young. And grey hair in Colombia counts a lot. And if you're 29 and you walk into the office, the minister's not going to take you seriously. So when they arrived at the meeting place, the oil minister arrived, out of his limousine, 8 bodyguards. Jim arrived, his limousine, out came 9 bodyguards. The minister took him seriously because obviously a guy who can afford to get the bodyguards and who needs the bodyguards, and that number of them, is obviously got the voice of somebody very high up in the organization. Jim managed to take the negotiation forward to a level at which the CEO could arrive, pick up the negotiation, sign the deal, and with very little work on his behalf and a good relationship with the oil minister, conclude things. What Jim managed to do was to make everyone look good, feel good. CEO looked good, managed to sign the contract. The local Colombians looked good because they were perceived well by people in headquarters. And of course, Jim looked good because Colombia looked good. And if you think that Jim, and this is the final thing about Jim, and then we'll close with your reflections on this and what the relevance is perhaps for the intercultural coaching and training area. One of the key things is that Jim didn't only do this for himself. It wasn't a selfish act. Just to illustrate why it wasn't selfish. Jim was expecting the CEO to arrive for a strategic meeting in Colombia. It was the first time that CEO had been to Colombia, to the Colombian office. Everyone was painting the walls, frantically cleaning up, making it look respectable. There was a kind of coffee lady in the room, in the boardroom where they were going to hold the event, and the CEO was supposed to be arriving. He was a bit late from the plane. But Jim, although he was talking to his senior team there and preparing the slides for the meeting with the CEO, took time just to ask the coffee lady how her daughter was, because she had been taken seriously ill and was in hospital. And the lady said that unfortunately, her daughter had taken a turn for the worse and she was really worried about her. At that point, Jim quietly told her to take the rest of the day off, even though the CEO was coming and they would arrange coffee in another way. She mentioned this leaving to some of her colleagues. It became a kind of legendary moment. He hadn't shouted this out. He hadn't made a big thing of it. But the word spread that Jim had time for the coffee lady 15 minutes before the CEO was arriving. So he could talk strategy on the one hand, but he could be caring enough about perhaps the lowliest person in the organization the other. That kind of reputation ensured that he was loved by the Colombian staff. And so Jim was able to build his local reputation as well as building his career reputation in the head office. So, and the key thing is to have a sponsor or sponsors. I mean, having one sponsor is an issue as an expat because, of course, if the CEO leaves, you're in the mess, basically. You're stuck. You're back to square one. The second thing is to have a track record with, which I think is what you were mentioning. So build up a track record of success in the organization. But he found that it's not only that you were doing interesting projects or good projects, but you were doing projects that were linked to people who are highly respected in the organization. So not only did you do project A, but you did project A with person B. And that made you a great person in the organization. Oh, somebody's making a noise. Oops. The third thing is to build up the strategic network, which is not only your key sponsors at the top of the organization, but middle managers who are going places, some senior managers, some gatekeepers like personal assistants who can give you time and energy. I want to pick up on something that people have put in the chat here. Yeah, you cannot compare Colombia and China. Jim was sent to Colombia partly because they wanted to give him a stretch opportunity in what for them was a good market. Bill was sent to China at that particular time, not because China was a successful market for them, quite the contrary. In fact, it was not considered to be an assignment which would build your reputation at that particular time. Barbara is saying it's about social skills at the end. Research shows the managers attend about 80% technical trainings. Absolutely. So it's about that ability, some people call it executive presence, that ability to to build your reputation and to be noticed by senior people in the organization who bet on you. They bet on you because actually it's a two-way process. They bet on you. They give you feedback. They give you stretch opportunities. They push you. They cover your back if you come under fire because you tried something and it didn't work. But at the same time, they expect something back, because often what they're asked for in the organization is to put together a team of people who trust each other and who could do impossible missions. There are always impossible missions in organizations. High profile, sexy, tough mission impossibles. And you want an A-team to be able to deliver those missions. And therefore, having people who are, in inverted commas, in your pocket, who you trust, they trust you, who are ready to be deployed on those missions is really important. So that can enhance the senior manager's reputation as well as the younger person, and often move up because of their expertise. Yeah, okay, that's absolutely true. And they rise to their level of social incompetence and technical competence. Absolutely true. The other.